evening. Welcome to the Drawing Center. I'm Laura Hoptman, the Executive Director, and I'm excited to invite you to this wonderful event this evening that is done in conjunction with this great show called For Opacity, curated by our Chief Curator, Claire Gilman. And without further ado, I'm going to ask Claire to come up and introduce our two speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. It is my pleasure to welcome you here today on the occasion of For Opacity, Elijah Burgher, Toyin Ojih Odutola, and Nathaniel Mary Quinn. And in organizing this three-person exhibition, it was very important to me that each artist's voice be present in the show. And to that end, each artist authored a text for the catalog, and each artist participated in his or her own public program. So in October, I did a walkthrough with Elijah Burgher of his work in the show, and that was followed by a performance by his good friend, the artist Gordon Hall. And in December, that's 13th, so next Thursday, I'm going to be doing a conversation with Nathaniel Mary Quinn on his work included in the exhibition. And tonight, I am thrilled to have Toyin Ojih Odutola in conversation with the acclaimed novelist and essayist Zadie Smith. So there are several reasons why I approached Zadie to have this conversation with Toyin. And first and foremost, because when I asked Toyin who she might like to be in conversation with, she immediately said without hesitation, oh, I've always wanted to speak with Zadie Smith. So who hasn't, I might ask. But in any case, fortuitously, I had also been thinking about Zadie because I had recently read her essay, an essay that she wrote on Toyin in British Vogue, as well as some other essays that she has written on artists such as Lynette Yiadom-Boakye, the painter Lynette Yiadom-Boakye, the photographer Dina Lawson, and the painter Henry Taylor. And in my opinion, Zadie's writing on art and culture is among the most, expresses a depth and candor that is rare in art writing these days. And I felt that there was no better person to address the ferocity and honesty, or sort of the equally fierce and honest aesthetic that is Toyin's artistic vision. So happily, Zadie agreed, or agreed to participate at least. And I want to mention that some of Zadie's outstanding essays on art are included in her recent book, Feel Free, which was just named one of the 100 notable books of 2018 by the New York Times Book Review. And who knows, perhaps this conversation will find its way in some form into a future book. So without further ado, I am honored to welcome Toyin Ojih Odutola and Zadie Smith.
Hi, can you hear me? Yeah. I'm really thrilled to be here, and I'm very nervous for some reason. We were talking earlier about, this is not my normal context, the gallery. And I am aware of not talking art speak, but I'm gonna do my best.
I don't do it either.
Okay, cool. I wanted to start with a quote of yours, which is actually in this beautiful program that I'm gonna be referring to a lot. Toyin said, "Drawing for me is investigative, and I'm always investigating. The real subject is the exploration of the materials and the mark making. Yes, there's the subject, but what I'm really asking myself is, what can I do to make the eye dance?" I thought about that a lot, because when I wrote about your work, I was transfixed on the subject, and I think I missed a lot, so I wanted to make up for that tonight. I wanted to talk about how you make the eye dance. And as impossible as it is to, generalize about the art of the diaspora, I do think one thread, or at least that has interested me, is this idea of rhythm. Rhythm in music, rhythm in paint, rhythm in language. So I wanted to talk about how you make the eye dance aesthetically, politically, geographically, existentially. We're gonna do that. Sound okay?
Sounds great.
Okay. So I wanted to start with a particular painting, Paris apartment, which is here, and I think
Right
behind
us.
me. Yeah, so you got it.
We weren't
double.
sure how this
Yeah.
was going to
Now
go,
you've got
so.
how do you want to do? I mean, I can tell you what I think I see, and then we can talk about how I'm wrong.
No, no. You're never
That's
wrong.
always fun.
No, I would love that. Hear that.
Yeah. Well, you know what I was thinking of when I was looking at this? Above all is a line of the Buddhas that probably someone in Washington Square told me once, that there are no two things. There's something about it which reminds me of almost like a Van Gogh. Know that all marks are in some sense equal. The way your eye moves fluidly from material to fabric to this topography under the arm. And of course, at the subatomic level, there are no two things. But maybe the great block to objectification, difference between saying this table, this person, this black person, this white person, is this idea of oneness. So the first thing I see is an incredible amount of texture passing from object to thing. And then these wonderful echoes. Like I was thinking about Renaissance painting. You have some of this, the head in the mirror,
Yeah.
the little, is it an ashtray or a bowl?
It's an ashtray.
And her collar.
Yeah.
So those seems to be references to a completely different tradition, and yet there's something perverse in them because nothing is frameable. Whenever you make frames, somebody's always escaping the frame.
Yeah.
Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
No frame fits. Everybody's just a bit above or just to the side, determined not to be boxed in.
Exactly. Exactly. It's really like you're noticing the things that I hope people to notice, which is really a relief. I think one of the things that when I started working, you mentioned when we first talked about my pen and ink drawings and how very early on that was, and you can see them back there with the treatment series, that was my work for about, I don't know, maybe 4 to 5 years in my professional career. And I just thought, what would it be like to extend this language into a surrounding? And again, it's a rhythm, it's a pattern, it's a texture. And give that same tactility that I really love that ballpoint penning does.
Right.
And the only medium that I could see that would translate that in a way that was really interesting to me was pastel and charcoal, chalk pastel. And so this is comprised of that. And color is always very tricky for me. I actually don't like color that much. And in pieces like this, I'm always trying to balance it out, but also have a slight like asymmetry in the composition. Like the fact that the frame behind her, it was supposed to be a fireplace, but I changed my mind. And it's like barely visible, but it's that jut out that makes the piece interesting, because I don't want her to be centered. I think whenever something is too centered, it gets a bit boring.
Right,
It gets
it's
a bit
stuck.
predictive. And I like these things where they're just cut off from the frame. And so you're kind of like almost happening into the picture.
Right.
It's not quite as tight. And the thing that really intrigued me about this piece was I actually was going to give up on it, truly.
Oh my God.
It was a completely different like look. The skin was actually made completely of matte charcoal, and I had a visit in the studio, which I don't normally do and I will not do. But this person was really clairvoyant, and they said, you need to finish that. Like, something's there.
Thank
And
God for that person.
yeah. And basically, I only had her skin done of her face, and the bodice, the shirt turtleneck that she's wearing was black. It was just completely black. And in some insane moment, I just said, all right, I want to go ham. Right. And I just said, if I'm gonna make this worth, not being in the trash bin, let me really, again, make the eyes dance. And that quote, when I say that, it's for me. I
Right.
mean, I think a lot of times people ask you as an artist, who's your audience? And I'm like, me.
Right,
But
you have
not
to
in that
interest
like
yourself, right?
narcissistic way,
Yeah.
but it's like when I look at an artwork, I'm interested in those things. I'm interested in the choices that an artist makes. And so the fact that this was so heavily laden on her bodice, I knew that the background had to fight with it. It had to
Right.
be something that was worthy. And so that's why you see the leaves in the back of the wallpapered panels there.
I think this kind of chinoiserie, this like Parisian decoration is being re-inscribed into her. If you
Yeah.
go to fancy Parisian apartments, first of all, maybe not these days, but not so long ago, you could find a blackamoor, usually with their head tilted in that position,
Yeah.
in a very similar form.
Absolutely.
And some of these, the hair, which is, classic Parisian chic, you're reminded, well, this is also classic West African chic.
Yeah, yeah.
And the tiny Chanel-like pearl in her ear is also Parisian and West African. It has like a double heritage here.
I wanted to inject elements, or at least I like to inject elements in my work that don't quite fit.
Right.
But somehow in my working through the picture, you would look at them as if they always were that way. Like
Right.
that arrangement has never, ever been questioned. And so that's like kind of my aim, is like I'm gonna put as many random things. I mean, there's so many ridiculous patterns in here. Like, what is that?
Well, to me,
And like, but in my mind, I'm like, make it work. And
but
you
it
like
looks
fight
like a
it.
topography, right? Like a landscape.
Yeah.
So banana leaves, or to me, from thinking of Jamaica, immediately banana leaves.
Yeah.
And this kind of almost rural topographic map. I can see ladders,
Absolutely.
trees, railways, branches. You feel like you're passing through something, like everything is moving.
I remember I was asked really early in my career, it's like, why do you draw the skin this way? Why do
Right.
you have this sort of textured mark making? And I was like, because I see mark making as a language. I see it as a landscape
Right.
that your eyes traverse through. And for me, that is what drew me to art making in the first place. It wasn't about this sort of flat matte surface. Like, I'm not interested in those kind of pictorial arrangements or ideas. Like, I want it to feel like it is weathered, like it is storied.
But when you
through
were
the
a
marks.
child starting, I wondered about this, like seeing the early work and the almost doodle-like element. Were you a doodler, and were you in that cartoon mode interested in going deeper and deeper and deeper into the mark?
I was obsessed with anime.
Right.
And that didn't really do well. But I no, and that's the doodly aspect. But I was interested in this idea, this magical transformation that happens when you look at something and then somehow transpose that on paper. But that moment between you're looking at something and the paper, there's a translation of you.
Right.
And I always tell this with students, like, don't get so caught up in exactitude, because that's not the point. I want to see your filter
Right.
in that translation. And so what really got me and what hooked me around high school, I wasn't one of those 5-year-olds that's like, I'm gonna be an artist. And my parents were like, no. I have African parents, so. But it was that, and I remember being 14 and thinking, wow, I just drew this thing, but I drew it weirdly. The perspective is
It passed
off.
through the filter of
Yeah, but that filter is interesting.
Right.
And when you're awkward and you're trying to figure your life out, when you see that translation and it happens and you actually like what you see, you like the mistakes,
Right.
you like those moments that don't quite fit, that was what I want to do with every drawing. Like, I could easily draw a person perfectly, but that would be the most boring thing. Like, I'm not a camera.
Right.
It's a filter of all my experiences. It's a filter of my view of the world. And I think that's what art should really be about. That's what I want to see when I look at
Well, this
a
is
work.
particularly tricky now in the age of the camera. I mean, it's been the age of a camera for a while, but I think it's fair to say now is the age of the non-stop permanent camera at all times, everywhere. So it's quite hard looking at a frame to think outside of a photograph. Like now when I look at paintings and drawings, I'm very aware that my subconscious sense is always the framing of Instagram, the framing of a photograph. And I think when I first wrote about you, all the things we discussed in this painting, all the way this body is imprinted onto the Parisian apartment and Paris imprinted onto it, you miss all of that if all you see is the photographic import, that is the subject. So
Exactly.
I interpreted these paintings basically in my gut as started from the bottom, now we're here, right? These wonderful, glamorous, beautiful people, a kind of aspiration and a dream and a fantasy. That's there too, I think.
Yeah.
But it's only one element of what's going on in these kind of complicated markings.
Yeah.
So I apologize for my previous
No,
stupidity.
but that read I think is very common, and I'm not averse to these reads. I think I always try to tell people, like, there's no wrong way to read a piece, to read a drawing or a painting or what have you. It is your experience, and you are experiencing it. It is valid.
Right.
I think what I get caught up is when people say that's what you wanted to do, and it's like, hold on
Right.
now. Calm down. And one thing that I've always been interested in these kind of pictorial sort of explorations was, how do I make fun of wealth? How do I
Right.
mess with it? Because one of the things that, and I guess we can move on to another piece.
Yeah.
Oh, wow, here we
How
go.
about, yeah, go.
Oh, that
I was
one.
going to say compound leaf, yeah.
Yeah. This is also around the same time that I was doing this, and when I started this. And I was just really, it was 2016 when I started working heavily in these materials, and as we know, Mr. 45 was, coming into to fore, and I just remember just thinking to myself, this is wild. Like, your wealth is a sort of like unquestionability.
Right.
Like you don't have any experience, but
Right.
because
It was
you
the
are
only
wealthy,
virtue.
you are allowed so much. Like it's almost you're given this sort of space that doesn't make any sense to me. And as an immigrant, I mean, I don't want to get too political, but that has been my life. Like I have to completely, constantly make myself small, question the space I occupy, you know, because in any moment I am going to be deported. You know, that's since I was first came here. So, you know, to live a life where you know you're not really meant to be here, even though you claim it and you fight for it, it's still there in your head like a nugget. And I just thought, you know what? Race is one thing, being of others another thing, or foreigner is another thing, but wealth is the same.
Right.
It's as much of a trap, and it makes you, it limits the parameters of movement.
Right.
You can't really think widely and with various, you know, with diversity. And so I thought, all right, let's put some folks that look like me and people I know who are wealthy in a variety of ways
Right.
in these spaces, but make it like I really couldn't care less. So
Well,
every
they're quite often entrapped, aren't they, in things which look a bit like
right,
cells.
right.
They're
It's
in the
like
corner.
They're still kind of in it, but there's also this very nonchalant,
Right.
you know, like I couldn't really care. And a lot of that has to do with this idea of like occupying space. And if you're looking upon a picture of a person or a character who does not care what you think of them,
Right.
who is not there to entertain you, who really couldn't care less if you are there looking at them. It really gives it a different read, and it takes a lot to build the picture into that, to get the gesture right.
You
to
see,
get
there
the,
you are talking like a novelist. It's so unusual. This idea of interiority in paintings. I mean, I can't remember the last time, I mean, apart from Lynette, really, that this was a
Yeah.
concern of a painter. But it's in, or a drawer, excuse me, in this image. The reason it seems to me separate from the photographic frame is that obviously she's not posing for the camera, but it's more than that. A lot of your people are facing forward in one way or another, but they're not offering themselves to a camera, as
Absolutely.
in, look how I look, or trying to present something or aspire to something. They really are just existing.
Absolutely, but also
in their own
existing
worlds.
with a sort of like, and it's because, you know, I'm thinking about John Burgher when he talks about the gaze and just that whole idea of the gaze is immediately masculine.
Right.
Very much so. I am a woman creating these images, so my gaze is paramount. And what I'm more interested in when I'm looking at a picture, especially if it's a female subject, but it could be regardless, is I don't want you to be a spectacle.
Right.
Like, that's not my aim. That's not what I want to see. And so how do I fight that urge that is so easy to fall into as
Right.
an image maker, is that you can easily make, especially a subject of color, be spectacle and completely go the opposite direction. And that's every piece in here that I've done, is to push back on that and to show nuance, to
Right.
show subtlety, but at the same time, I'm packing and layering the surface with
Right.
so many marks, so much material that you don't know what you're looking at. It's a bit disorienting, which is the point. But then as you actually sit with it and you enjoy it and you really kind of get that this is a story.
Right.
You're in a story. You lose yourself in that, and then it doesn't become, why is this black person here
Right.
taking up space?
You're not a
you know,
flat
it's
surface, your
suddenly
eye is
no longer
moving.
that obfuscation, which is so much a part of being like an artist of color, is the first thing. It's like, justify why you drew this black person.
There's a few pieces which
It's like, wow, well, let's justify why there's like 50
Right.
white people in MoMA.
there's a few.
It's like, why do I have to have those conversations, instead have a story?
Right. There's a few pieces a bit later, I don't know if we can get them here, that
Oh, yeah.
seem to me about that complicated sense of guilt about looking and being looked at.
Is it
That one in particular,
This one.
the guilt of
Yes,
looking,
Yeah.
which seems to me twofold. Something about the fear of objectification, of something that is other to other people but not other to you. It's your brother, your cousin, your family, your boy, whoever it is, somebody close to you, but being aware also of this external eye. But then at the same time, in this boy, I saw, I mean, I don't know about you, but in the classrooms of my childhood, that face was so familiar, where you were picked out and the child shut down because they're being picked out by a teacher who is either afraid of them or about to say something. I remember that face. It's
Yeah.
familiar to me,
Right.
both like psychologically, but also from the point of view of the artist. Like, am I recreating that moment where the person is picked out, isolated, displayed? And also, he's
Absolutely.
so beautiful. We have to talk about the desire in these
Right.
pictures
No,
too
no,
sometimes.
I use beauty as a sort of, everyone's gonna think I'm a jokester, but it's not. I find the things that are sort of knee-jerk reactions, things that are sort of the quick kind of go-to read or thought, whatever you call it, a bit suspect,
Right.
even my own. And so whenever I create any kind of drawing, regardless of this material, this is, you know, pencil on blackboard, very layered, and I just wanted to completely, you know, this is Toyin or studio mode, forgive me, but it's like, make this as difficult to look at as possible.
Right.
Like, I want you to really make it hard and make the viewer work to see this picture. And anyone who sees that work, it's around the corner right there, you gotta spend some time with it. And I told my mom, I was like, you gotta do some yoga moves to see it. You know, because it is, and it's like you're moving in order to see it. You're the one who has to adjust yourself to see it, which is often the other way around.
Right.
Adjust yourself for me. And again, that's why it's called the guilt of looking, and this idea of like being conscious of what you're looking at. To bring back Burgher, one of my favorite lines he's ever said is, "It's one thing to be seen, to be looked at, and it's another thing to be seen."
Right.
And how those two can play, and that experience that you have isn't a projection. It's valid.
Right.
It's real again, and it's just also this idea of be aware of what you see. Be aware of why you feel that way.
I think for me, almost the opposite of this picture, see if I can find it. Yes, is this one. Like how, the question here, this boy seems to me perfectly aware of how he is seen all the time by many different people, different situations. He's conscious of it, he has to be. The question with this picture is, how do you make, to me, whiteness strange to itself?
Yes.
Like alien to itself.
Say
not,
it
not
for
the
the
most,
people in the back.
natural thing in the world.
Sorry, that was the best. How do you make whiteness strange to itself?
Yeah, this is strange. Suddenly she looks alien and peculiar. Maybe she's a celebrity, but I can't tell which one. but it's really made alien.
Yeah.
This thing which is always portrayed to you as the neutral subject, everybody else a variation on a theme.
I'm so glad we're having this conversation.
Oh, good.
This is literally like giving me so much life right now. Like, that is exactly it. That was exactly why I used this material. It's white charcoal. And one of the things that we always notice, of course, when any artist works on any surface, it is a white ground.
Right.
That is the default. Even it could be off-white if you're being a little European.
Right.
I don't know. But it's the same surface.
Right.
And what I thought is, like, how do I make a black surface, a black ground neutral?
Right.
How do I do that? And that's tricky, because immediately when you put a black anything, suddenly a room gets smaller, right? Suddenly things get a little bit contentious. You know, there's so many reads to blackness that we can get into and we don't have time for. But it's the idea of blackness and how it overcomes and envelopes. And to me, that's kind of reassuring. It's like an inclusiveness. It has to take in everything. Like, the biggest joke, I had a big moment in grad school where I almost got kicked out of a class. Shocker. But basically it was color theory class, and you know, whiteness and blackness include all colors. But whiteness excludes, it refracts. That is the point. You see the colors when it is refracting it. And I thought, well, ain't that peachy?
Right.
Whereas blackness is just like, it's in me, man.
Yeah.
It ain't going nowhere. It's just
included.
all mixed in there. And it's like this muddied thing. And I thought, no, that's actually really great as a ground to start from, you know, as a catalyst for something. And so when I put white on top of it, yes, it's a very contrasting element. They're the opposite ends of a spectrum. But how do I make that whiteness so other?
Right.
That, you know, it's no longer this black mark on a white ground, it's the other way around. And in that, the read is the same as that black ground on that white paper. And it's something we're so used to. We don't even question it, but it is there. And so why that piece is so layered and it's just so packed in is because I want it to be as other as possible. If you were to invert this image on your phone, and I'm sure there's plenty of apps to do that, you would see the face.
Right.
But, you know, that's not the point. It's that, again, I'm just going back to what I mentioned earlier. It's like, pay attention. Everything has a reason why you think that way.
Right. It's surprising to me how an inversion like that seems quite simple. But to me, that's a visual version of, for example, sometimes I go and talk to young black students who want to go to university in England to try and encourage them to go. And one of the things I hear most often is, But if I go, don't you become less black in some ways? And I always say to them, the most simplest rhetorical inversion is, can you imagine anything that a white person does making them less white? It's an inconceivable concept. I went to college and then I wasn't so white anymore, and I played some basketball and I just didn't feel that white anymore. When you reverse it, you see how bizarre the concept is.
Right.
That you could in some way lose some part of yourself by going to college or listening to a certain kind of music or wearing skinny jeans or whatever it is. How is it possible that blackness is such a vulnerable thing that it can be destroyed by going to... So once you revert the rhetoric, you see somebody is trying to take something away from you.
It's wild.
And that's crazy.
Right.
It's crazy rhetorically, and it's crazy in logic too.
It's also this idea that we find ourselves in right now, right? There's a lot of conversations about, we need to preserve whiteness. And it's like whiteness has never needed any preservation. It's constantly been preserved. In fact, it's been more purified over time. And the thing that I'm really fascinated with in applying that to a material read, right, to the actual work is, I need you to understand that all of this not only is a construct, right, but it is also convenient for a lot of people.
Right.
Like, it's very convenient to look at whiteness that way. It's very convenient as a material, not just as a societal tool and imposition, but as a material. It's very convenient to look at blackness as this. I need to darken this surface. I need to do something. Like, those terms, those applications are... You can call it socialization, but I think it's also convenient for people. And whenever I talk to anyone who, we're in a weird time where people are like, yeah, let's preserve it. But look at the term like miscegenation or something, and how people say the one drop rule. That to me is the stupidest thing I've ever heard of in my entire life. Because when you think about that concept and how it's applied, not only in society, but also in like how a drawing is made, it's like suddenly this surface is tarnished. There's nothing you can do. It's done. And it's like, how do you know that whiteness wasn't tarnished to begin with? Like, I have no idea where this came from. What is this idea of purity, And I want to mess with that. And so with, like, I don't know if you can tell with some of the marks, like some blackness is showing through. And some whiteness is really caked on. It's like the surface of the skin is fighting with itself.
Absolutely.
And those kind of elements are my way of applying those ideas. I mean, look, I don't expect the average viewer to experience that or to feel that, but it's there for them to really think about, again, why are you thinking that this is right or wrong?
I think that the most effective thing it does, even if you're not bring it to consciousness, is that it messes with the binary of what your ideas of black and white are. It just disturbs and distorts them for a moment.
You said it yourself, it's a very simple thing to do, but it's amazing what happens when you
power.
do
They
it.
laugh. They laugh at the idea of whiteness being lost by any action, because it is that simple to disturb. Oh, look, I touch a computer, that's what happens.
No, it's all good.
That's what happens.
Speaking of whiteness.
I do think I recognize a few of these guys.
Do you recognize them?
Maybe two, only two.
Damn, I went through so much work.
I may be wrong, though. I don't want to spoil it for
No,
others,
but like, just throw out some
I think
names.
I see a Tom Cruise.
Yeah.
I think I might see Nico.
No.
Oh, no. Oh, from the Velvet Underground. Well, that's just my downtown
No,
brain.
I can see it yeah, I can see it.
No, then the rest I don't know.
All right, I'm only doing this once.
Are you going to tell us?
I'm gonna reveal.
Good. Oh, yeah.
I've never revealed it, but I'm gonna do it for y'all. It's Tom Cruise, the guy who played not Luke Skywalker, Darth Vader, the younger version in the Star Wars movies.
Oh, cool.
Y'all know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Ryan Gosling.
No, oh yeah, there you go.
David Bowie, Francesco Clemente, and Woodrow Wilson.
Oh, that's fantastic. Woodrow would be particularly upset to find himself in that get-up. I have a question about your decision sometimes, if I can go. Well, here's a good example. Well, this is a self-portrait, so the question doesn't really apply there. Okay, here. My daughter saw this picture when I was working on this at home, and she said, "Ooh, he's hot." And I thought that's not an unfair question about desire in these portraits. It does appear sometimes. But anyway, first I wanted to ask about the choice about skin color and shade. When, in certain portraits, you go back to this obsidian black that we see in Kerry James, and I wonder, maybe it's just you feel it at a certain moment, but is there a rule in your mind about when they appear in what seems to be almost I wouldn't say more naturalistic, because in fact, no one looks quite like that, and no one looks quite like the obsidian men.
Right.
But what is the choice in your mind?
The reason that I went into the chalk pastel with the skin tone was that I actually had been doing work to the piece back there.
Yeah.
So that's the matte charcoal. And that piece was what I did for about a couple years or so. And it's, again, like very similar to Kerry James Marshall's work. And so I just kept thinking that I need to have a picture, and you saw it in the Whitney show, of multiple tones in a picture.
Right.
Because I think when you have just that one read, that it gets so monolithic, and it also becomes very problematic for people, because then they're like, well, of course, that is vis-a-vis blackness. And it's not the multi-tonality that is the reality of blackness and the beauty of it. And so what that provided, what chalk pastel provided, was that option, and also a world of that, because I combine different colors to create these skin tones. They don't exist straight from, the stick. It's me mixing and trying to create new colors, because again, the blackness is infinite to me.
Right.
Like, I don't see it as just this one read or one definition. And with this character, that's when I was starting to test it out, test out the material. And yeah, he's sexy for a reason.
I was about to say, to my daughter's point, he is fine.
Yeah.
And
I mean, his shirt is open and he's got like the coils on the chest.
Right.
A little bit. But the thing that I really wanted to show was also a mixed person who is black.
Right.
So he's
his
Asian
eyes are light,
and black, his eyes. So like this idea again, but first read, you would think, I mean, I've had people say he's Indian, I've had people say he's Latino, doesn't matter, but again, these are all inclusive things. They're not exclusive.
Right.
And he's smoking a cigarette, sorry mama. And it's called Taking Chances for that reason.
To please your mama?
Because I know she's going, so he's smoking on this picture.
What is this about?
What is it exactly? Okay. And so that was kind of what I was aiming for. I mean, he has freckles. If you get into it, there's freckles in there, which I love. I love like adding those kind of details to it, because it adds to the narrative of the picture. And like many of the pieces I made around this time, around like 2017 to 2018, I was also trying to get the character to look just beyond.
Right.
Like, they're not looking at you. Like, even if it is, it's very direct, and there's a reason for that too. But what I really wanted to still have it hold your attention, to captivate you, even though they're not directly looking at you. Right. And again, you have to work at that. You have to play with color and composition. You can see with this piece and that one, I tend to make them lean a little to the left.
Right.
I don't know why. It's like a thing. Maybe it's because I grew up in the South, and it's like, and so he's leaning a little bit towards that way. And I'm really also wanted to give a lot of the highlights and the details a little bit more work, because I was still figuring that out. Later on, I softened that, but it's very distinct from the later works I did.
Do you think about, I wouldn't say as kind of art historical revenge, but do you think about being a rapacious, desiring female eye on a male object, or are you much nicer than that?
Oh, men aren't that interesting.
But do you think about that relation? Because it's interesting, it's new in the world, it's kind of fascinating.
But I think men would love to hear that. Like, yeah, this is revenge. And it's like, you ain't that important. Like, calm down. In the sense that, like, I'm thinking about color, I'm thinking about composition, I'm thinking about, why did I choose that orange, right? Because it pops really well with his skin tone. Like, I'm thinking about a lot more material things, a lot more logistical things, and the reason it's a man is a choice, but, I think it gets really slippery when you start making men sort of objectified in the same way, because
putting them under the same process.
Right, because I think
no one
it's
gets free that way.
Right, it's like, why would you even try? But at the same time, it's really dull.
Right.
Because I don't want to see anyone objectified in that way. It's not interesting to me at all.
Maybe it's your concern with this granular detail, which makes him in his kind of subjecthood so relaxed. Like all this kind of, what would be from the external view a racial question about him. Where exactly is he from? Where exactly are those palm trees? What color is his eyes? Is he completely, is he half? All these questions. He is unconcerned with this categorization.
Absolutely.
And that's beautiful in itself.
And that's
all
a
you-
powerful thing,
Yeah,
right?
it's a
Like that's
powerful
something that
thing.
we so rarely get to experience, and why, I fight, again, those like preconceived notions that even like find its way into the studio in me.
Right.
Like there are times where I'm like, God, if I could just do this or maybe adjust it this way, and I have to stop myself
Right.
because those things are, again, not just convenient for others, but it's also like, have you ever had this experience where you feel like, I really want to do this thing, but if I do it, I'm revealed?
Yes,
It's like
because
this
you're
weird
living
kind
in a
of-
country that thinks it's racialized at its very bones. I mean, if you come from the Caribbean and from West Africa, you have a different view on the world. You come here and you're entered into a racial system. What this painting reminded me more than anything is spending time. My mother married a Ghanaian guy for a while, and we spent some time in Ghana. And it was the first time, not that there isn't a process of classification, but it wasn't the one I'd grown up with. It was different. So when you enter into a different culture and suddenly the rules of definition, we were being discussed, me and my mother and our friends, as reminiscent of certain tribes, certain peoples. I'd never heard these distinctions. I'd heard light, dark, the language of London, one way or another, or the language of Jamaica. So when you're entered into a new system of classification, it's kind of extraordinary.
Yeah.
Because you're trained in one mode. What I see with your characters are people who are somehow freed of that external pressure. They are in themselves. They kind of rule their roost, their corner. Even when they're cornered, they're not cornered. So it is like a fantasy in one sense, right? Because in life we are cornered most of the time.
Absolutely. But I would hesitate to say fantasy because I think that this is a reality that is lived amongst Black folks
Right.
when we're together.
Right.
And it's often that when we go into spaces where we are, of course, the minority or there's less of us around,
Yeah, so
we
you feel
feel
it.
like we have to do that. And
It's what Chimamanda said about in that novel Americana, coming from Nigeria to here.
Yeah.
Suddenly you become a black person of a certain type in America. You're suddenly defined in a new way that was completely different from what she'd been raised in.
there's a thing I always tell my brothers. I'm like, to kind of, I don't know if it's very reassuring. I'm not really a very reassuring sibling. But I always say there's a cloud that precedes you.
Right.
And it's tough. It's like you're trying to fight through it and you can't. But the cloud could be rain
Right.
or it could be a rainbow. And that's kind of what I have to fight against when I create these pieces, is that I can go into a very tragic narrative.
Yes.
I can go into a very
Kinda
negative place.
Afro-pessimism, yeah.
And I've always wanted to go against Black struggle and pain because I feel like those stories are so prevalent already, it almost becomes like the default.
Right.
And every character that you see, especially here in this show, but also in most of the works that I've done as of late, is that we're fighting against this wanting to say, like, yes, we have a lot of pain, but we also have a lot of joy and a lot of nonchalance and a lot of just like
Of being, which is a
being,
concern
and
with this
smoking a
relation back
cigarette
and forth between
at
how
a
you treat
disapproving
me.
mother.
There's a beautiful, Toyin, I mean, visual artists are all extraordinary, but not all of them are as incredibly rhetorically amazing as you are. You write like a writer. You also talk like a writer. No offense to visual artists in the audience, but it's really. Usually I'm trying. You're trying to translate and speak, but most of what you've said is better than I could ever say it. And on this line is so beautiful. I am not this narrative that has been written about me, flattened and archetypal. I am my own person. Is my favorite part. A land that I now wish to take back. Here I will show you. Do not omit me or render me invisible. I am here. I will not be erased or smudged out. I am as vast and wondrous as the night sky. There's so much joy in that refusal of flatness.
Absolutely. I think one of the things that I love about the medium that I use, through drawing, through pastel and charcoal, is that it has variety, multi-tonal variety. I mean, I wish I could paint. I love that you're calling them paintings because, like, honestly.
I just keep calling it paintings.
No, but
you can't stop
I
me.
used to hate it, but now I kind of love it. I'm like, yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
You think they're
You're
paintings,
painting with charcoal and
but
pencils.
they ain't.
I know.
They're drawn.
The language is problematic because I want a grand word for these grand
But
pictures, and the only one I have in my mouth is paintings.
But then listen to this. I started out with pen and ink, and now I'm working with dry media, chalk, pastel, and charcoal. These are rudimentary tools in a way.
Right.
These are like basic foundation courses of what you use in art school. But yet I made it something more.
Right.
I put it beyond the capabilities of what you assume that tool could do, which is very similar to the projections that we have about people in that way.
And also diasporic instinct, right? Give me a little, make a lot.
Exactly.
By necessity.
Resourcefulness to the end.
Yeah.
But it's that idea. And it's like, how do I, again, challenge the assumptions not only of persons and characters and historically oppressed narratives, but actual materials.
Right.
Like, have that be a narrative too.
Right, you ennobled the charcoal.
I really
You
and the
did.
pastel.
And the pastel. You raised it up.
There was so much chalk in my studio. It was me. It got everywhere.
Can we end on, I want to,
What was the other one then?
I want to do your self-portrait.
Oh,
Can I
yeah.
call it that? I don't know.
It is.
It is.
It is.
Looks like you.
It is me. It's it was a very satisfactory night. Sorry, Mom. But
This is a portrait to me of satisfaction.
I'm gonna regret that forever.
I know, your poor mother. And she's filming it too.
We will discuss this later today. No, it was, again, I as you do, you take a selfie. And one of the things that fascinates me about selfie culture now is the lie of the selfie. In that it feels very immediate, it feels very, whatever people want to call it, like raw, but it's a very performative act.
Well, you only see people in the street, how much time it takes to get the fake angle on your face.
Exactly.
There's nothing real about
It's
this.
so much, and the thing that I always love is, the auto-portrait, right? The history of the auto-portrait art historically, and how so much of that is posed. But of course, if they were to, I don't know if we even survive that long, but years down the line, if someone were to look at, a selfie, how is it any different from Rembrandt's sketches of himself in his studio? It's just this idea of the performance and what we feel is our enhanced self or our true self or whatever we want to sort of portray. And in that moment, I looked raggedy. Like really raggedy.
Well, you
but
don't
I
look raggedy
felt
there.
so good. Like
Yeah,
I
you
felt
feel-
like I was feeling myself in a type of way.
Right.
And I just thought, all right, as you do, you take a selfie. But what I loved about the picture, it was like the lie was revealed to me of that. And I thought, I want to preserve that lie in a way, in a picture. I don't know if that makes any sense to y'all. And so when I was drawing this, the eyes are the most engaging part for a reason, because it's almost like they're, as I was working on it, they were looking back at me like, girl, what are you doing? Yeah. and so the title is The Many Ways to Work It Out, is the fact that I really labored over that surface of the face. I really wanted to get
When you say labor, what does that mean? How long and what does it involve?
It took a while. This piece is, depending on the piece, times are very variable, but this piece, I felt like the time I spent on the skin was a lot longer than I normally would. And I think it was because I was trying to create what I thought it should be. And it kept fighting back and saying, no, this is what it is.
Right.
Because of the materials, because of the picture, this is the outline, this is all, this is where you're gonna go. And in the end, that's why it's very, compared to the other pieces here, it's a lot more marks you can see on it. It's a lot more, exposed in a way. My hand is revealed a lot more. And in that, I actually hated the piece for a very long time. And now that I look at it, I'm kind of just like, actually, I'm really glad I did that, because it was the beginnings of this relationship that I had with this material, but it's also the beginning of my understanding of the lie of the self, the lie of this projection that we often put, because people always expect you to
Present,
show yourself in that
your
way.
Your best self,
but
supposedly.
you are so many. You know that.
Right.
Like, that is fact. And so...
Well, when you think of those Rembrandt portraits, I'm sure you know them, right? Moving through his life, a kind of continual, very laborious selfie. Mm-hmm. The midlife ones, like, well, in his version of midlife, 30-something, I like this, they're kind of satisfied.
Yeah.
Self-contained, proud. Because you should be proud to be Rembrandt, as you should be proud to be Toyin, I believe. There's a certain amount of pride, and as he gets older, you get these shapes in the background, circles, as if he's kind of knows he's moving out of his life. They're like marking time. Yeah. So my question about these things here is, are they in the selfie, and what do they mean to you? The half window or mirror, the
It's a
wall,
mirror,
the
yeah.
shadow? I don't know what this is. I'd like to know.
Yeah.
What does it mean that? Because to me, it looks like the instinct of someone like a cartoonist like Robert Crumb, that there's something obsessive about it. Every inch has to be covered and redone and redone and redone.
Right. I always, I play with shadow play and light a lot. I think shadows are, I'm going to reveal my crazy, but I think that shadows are the real.
Right.
In the picture. So if there's not a lot of shadow in the piece, it's because I'm fully invested in the fantasy of the making of that work. But the piece that, here I'll show the other piece.
Compound leaf, you have the shadow of your
That
face.
shadow is the real.
Yeah.
And the person is it. But that's me, Toyin thought, you know?
Well,
like I
shadows-
always like to play with how shadows are presented, and the elements that I add, oh crap, sorry, I'm out of sync. The elements that I add in there are purely for composition. Like there's the yellow is there because the blue is on the other side. You know, I wanted to have a gray background. You know, those are all just kind of like logistics, calculations.
Right.
But how do you make those elements interesting? You can't just put a block of yellow or a block of blue and all that
Right.
stuff. You have to make it work. You got to make it look like, again, like those arrangements have always been. That's
Right.
how they are meant to be. But that, again, that was kind of what I struggled with this piece, is that everything wasn't working. It was like I'm constantly fighting with what I wanted to be and what it was becoming. And I had to I rarely relinquish. I'm a bit of a control freak when I draw, but this one I did. And I'm glad I did, but I won't do it again. But it's the textures of the sweater and how that is like has to be calmed by the brick wall behind it. Like these are decisions that are made. You know, when you look at a picture, and I don't blame anyone for not being aware of this, but every decision that is made by the artist was intentional.
Right.
I really get annoyed when artists say like, yeah, I just winged it. I'm like, oh, suck it. You know, like, come
But
on.
does intentional include complete control? Because I intend things, but I certainly don't control them at the other end.
True. You can't always be in complete control. But I think that what I do want people to, at least I hope people to see, is intention.
Right.
To see that everything that is there is been thought over and over again and is meant to be there. It's not an accident that
Right.
that was there. I don't know, that might be a very controlling instinct, but I think a lot of artists, a lot of artists share that. And I'm very like, I don't want to get too revealing, but I always feel as if the decisions that I make, I have to make sure in my head that I would be happy with it regardless of whether I like the picture or not.
Right.
So if I'm putting, you know, that green sweater, which I regretted at the time, I know that when I look at this is still a very interesting and strong picture.
Yeah.
And I'm satisfied with that because I know that it still has the intention there. It's still strong. I don't know if that's...
It's beautiful. And I like the idea that the shadow is the real in your work. And thinking about the history of the shadow, I mean, Cara Walker's shadows and the, on Compound Leaf,
Yeah.
it reminded me a little bit of the daguerreotypes. And just the idea of when you are a minority in the world, being rhetorically considered a shadow of something else, right?
But also how shadows take up more space, too,
Right.
alongside with the subjects.
Right.
So that's why, I don't know if you've seen some of the earlier works that I've done or the works at the Whitney, it was like, there were shadows from a character that's just kind of sprouted out.
Right.
You know, it was like almost taking over, and it could be an absence on a wall, an absence of anything, an object or what have you, but the shadows populated those spaces. And that, to me, was presence as well, and it was valid. But in this piece's case, I wanted to add further was that I also wanted to show a very satisfied woman.
Yeah, that's
Like
was
a
exact.
satisfied black woman. Like
Right.
just,
That's a very unusual
know.
image in the culture.
yeah.
Satisfaction
like
for women is
completely satisfied. Like she's like, I'm perched.
Right.
I'm good.
Well, satisfaction is a problem in capitalism because if you're satisfied, you don't want to buy anything. So everyone's always discouraged from this kind of ultimate pleasure.
It's true.
Yeah.
It's true.
We have one more picture.
Oh yeah.
Guarded
I
intimacy.
really love that one.
Tell us a little bit about that.
This one is of my brother, and it's so strange, this show. Again, a lot of these pieces I haven't seen in like 2 years, or you know, it's like been a while, and so it was really. I remember at the opening, I came up to that piece, and I had a bit of a moment because it was around the time when I was deciding to transition into pastel, and I drew this photo of my brother, and I often use either myself or members of my family as what I call test runs, which sounds very like it's this experiment with your face and your features. But you know, essentially, yeah, you know, in order to, because I feel if I used anyone else, I don't have permission to use anyone else's face. But my brother's sure, in that I was just trying to see if I could push charcoal any further, and I realized I couldn't. Like it was just sort of like a failure piece, but not in like a sad way. It was kind of like, all right, you're ready to move on.
Because
like
you couldn't get the depth you wanted?
I couldn't get, yeah, there was a lot of information I wanted to pack in, and there's only so much you can do with one patina.
Right.
You know, it's like it's one note, and I wanted to give it more. I wanted to add more, and I just knew I had to move on into another thing. And one of the beauties, again, of like working with chalk pastel is I'm adding different chalk pastels together to get tones and to get all these different varieties. And that to me is like, it opened up a whole new language for me in the studio. And so I look at this picture with like this bittersweet feeling, like this is Toyin 2016 going hard. But like let's just do one last hurrah. And then I just loosened up and just like let go.
I'm amazed it's your brother. I never would have guessed. It seems to me just a portrait of unknowability. Like he's so interior. I love this mirror reflecting the back of his head. Again, this sense of being in a cell and being cornered on all sides, but free.
There was no mirror behind him. I just added that. I just thought it was like a really interesting element. I love the idea, again, the lie of a mirror. It's like the same lie of a selfie. You're looking at the flip of yourself when you're looking in the mirror. It's not you, but we rely on them so much, the way we rely on our camera phones. And I use mirrors as like sort of motifs in a lot of my drawings as well, just for that reason. It's like you think you're looking at yourself, but you're looking at an illusion. You know, and that's also in reality as well. I mean, sure, I don't want to smudge my lipstick and look crazy, but you know, if you're looking for that for some kind of certainty or some kind of like meaning, it's not going to be there. It's void. Right. You know?
Every drawing here, I think, is rejecting the idea that this is reality. This is your evidence. This is a person. It's always asking questions about what a person is. It's not definitive.
And the idea of that person, and the idea of communities as well. I think that, you know, the greatest gift I was ever given as a kid was when we moved to Alabama for the first time, and a kid looked at me, a black kid, and said, "You're African, man, I can't mess with you." And I just remember thinking, but you're darker than me.
Right.
What the hell? You know, like it was just this weird
ideology over reality.
But then it was a gift, because I realized that, oh, you've got it too.
Right.
I thought I was the only one that was like really scared. You're scared too. So like, you know, once you realize the lie of that, as an image maker, I want to completely attack it, you know, and push it further. And it goes into something much more, you know, art historical, or in the marks and in the making, the actual method and the compositions, what comprises the work, but it also goes into how it's read, right? And like how I wish to present it, how I wish to have it be seen.
But I think you've already done that. If I imagine being that child in my childhood, seeing these paintings, or having any opportunity to see paintings like this, how different my childhood would have been, and probably a lot of people in this room. We're going to open up to questions, I think, if that's okay.
First of all, thanks so much for this conversation. Hey, Zadie. I wanted to hear a little more from each of you about what it feels like to be in conversation in a space like this, across disciplines, across mediums. As you mentioned, it's maybe unfortunately pretty rare that artists talk across disciplines in this sort of a forum. And what else is interesting or bracing or peculiar about this kind of interaction for you guys?
I think for me, what was really, why I really wanted to speak with Zadie was that and this was actually the quote I was talking about. It was from your collection of essays, Changing My Mind, and I'm going to butcher this in a paraphrase, but it was basically, you said that there are some writers who can work alone and they can just hammer it out. They don't need any distraction, and you used an analogy or a metaphor of an orchestra. And there's some writers who need to hear the oboe, or they need to hear the tuning and the sound check. And that's like how you have books all around, just strewn all around as you're writing. So you get a moment where you feel like things are getting a little too meaty. You need to cut back the meat, so you read Nabokov or something, you know, and you know, in other cases you would read Kafka, and I remember reading that and thinking, that's what I do with images. I'll be in the middle of working on something, for instance, this piece right here, and thinking, I don't know if this green is right, or I don't know if I should use this texture here, and I would look at a Rembrandt, or I would look at a Tissot, or I would look at Louise Mailey Jones and think, oh, someone else has already done that. And it's like a permission. It's like this, like, oh, someone has done that. And it's not even like you're reacting to that. It's like,
Right.
oh, I'm allowed, okay? Or not allowed, you know, like I can still make this decision
Right.
and I'm not going crazy thinking that I'm wrong. It's just, it's like a reassurance in a way. It's a bit of a scaffolding that helps you kind of build up the picture. And that was coming from reading, you know, her essays and thinking, this writer completely gets how an image is made. It's like all of the different references that come together to make
Right.
it. Like all of these pieces are the sum of so many references and so many different elements, and they are beautifully coalescing into this one singular thing. And I thought that was so much of reading about how you build up a novel, what goes into it,
Right.
the process of that, and the changing and shifting of method. That, I don't know, to me that it wasn't even like a far-reaching kind of stretch. I immediately got what she was talking about. And that sort of like, again, the fact that you said I can write is just
Oh, you
blowing my mind right now.
definitely can
Because
write.
that to me was like
Unfortunately, I can't draw, so it's not a fair exchange.
but it was, yeah, those kind of elements very much inspired me.
Oh, thank you. For me, it's just, partly it's just coming up against something that I cannot do in the simplest way. Craft interests me, and I can't, when I say I can't draw, I really mean I cannot draw a stick man, anything, in any context. And I always felt I had no visual sense whatsoever, to be honest. But recently, I guess I live downtown, I live near a load of galleries, and I have felt, I suppose, as an adult, quite alienated by a lot of photographic culture, because of so much of it is commercial. You know, most of the photographs I see are people selling things or people selling themselves, and I'm quite exhausted by that kind of image making, and there's so much of it. So for me, it's just been a kind of revelation to be in front of drawings, in front of paintings, in front of Lynette, Kerry James, and also just personally, this diaspora art, which was suddenly all around me, or which I was attentive to, it's just kind of a personal revelation, you know? I really didn't have much visual art background when I was a kid. I didn't really see much art, and I was so focused on finding, I guess, African-American writing, or writing that would give me this permission or whatever to write. So I realized a little part of me which wanted to know about more about black visual arts. I wanted to see it and know it. I'd been so obsessed with the literary side. And then exactly that art practice of taking from everywhere is something I find really inspiring. Like one of the few artists on my side of the fence who feel that way, there's a wonderful quote by James Baldwin who says, you know, this is all mine, the paintings are mine, the music is mine, Mozart is mine. He like just takes the whole world. He doesn't care that these people are hundreds of years distant from him, a different color or whatever. It's his to own, chew up, and you know, even his writing is like a digestion of the whole testament, just remade through this kid's mouth. He wanted everything, and as far as I can tell from visual arts practice, there is that rapaciousness, and in music too, actually. It's only in literature that people tend to be become narrow, you know, read what looks like them or read in an anxious way. So I always feel a little closer to music and visual arts in the sense of that rapaciousness, like that urge to get as much input as possible from as many places as possible.
The best thing I ever got, lesson I got from my mom was like, you know, I used to listen to all kinds of music and things like that, and you know, I would come home just really like dejected and think like, they said that I can't listen to this music, it's not allowed or whatever, and she's like, why wouldn't you include that?
Right.
You know, because again, it's like this idea of like, we have to put ourselves into the thing, but she was like, this is all part of you, as Baldwin would say. It's going through you and it's a part of you
As
too.
much as anyone that owns any culture, you own all of it, yeah. It's human action, so it's yours.
Exactly.
Hi. First of all, thank you so much for taking the time to share your artistic practice with us. I am interested to learn more about how you choose scale and what does scale mean in terms of your practice?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I used to work as you can see with the pen and ink works, very small. I think the largest piece I ever did was like a 30 by 40, and I was like, I'm gonna die, Joe. This is gonna kill me. Because it's ballpoint pen ink, so you can just imagine what that's like. And when I started working with charcoal and pastel, I knew that one of the things I always hated in art school was that just big paintings for no reason, or big pieces for no reason. If you're gonna use that scale, fill that scale, have every corner of it intentioned.
Right.
And so I was a little daunted by scale at first, but then I thought, wait, this could be a really interesting way to create narratives, right? To create a world, and little vignettes and scenes. And so the scale is really predicated to that. Like, I'm really thinking a lot about what scene do I want to depict instead of just a person in a space, in a time. You know, it's more about like what ideas, what worlds do I want to explore? And that, of course, has many layers, from the material to the narratives and whatever comes up. But the scale for me is very intentioned. Like, that piece is a very cinematic feel for a reason, you know, because I wanted it to feel that way. Whereas a lot more, usually I do like a vertical alignment. Things like that are always something I think about, because I'm interested in the potential of a large picture being more than just this big hulk of thing, which is often what we see. Sometimes my favorite moment is when seeing little kids in museums and they're like, wow, and all they say is just big, and it's like, I don't ever want anyone to look at my piece and go, it's big. Like, that is just that's just a sad read. It's almost shady, you know, like, whereas if you're looking at it, you forget the scale, it becomes immersive, it becomes something you can kind of get into and lose yourself in, hopefully. So that's really why I wanted to go into scale. But I kind of prefer small, no lie.
My question for you was, does the fact that most of your subjects, they seem unbothered by the binary, as Zadie was saying, does that have anything to do with their wealth? And is there a reason, if this has anything to do with that, if there a reason that you rather depict them as content than like happy or elated or anything like that?
The wealth actually came very recently. I was depicting the characters like that well before I started exploring that wealth idea and like playing with the family saga that I've been obsessed with this past few years. I just wanted to see that for myself. Again, going back to what people would think is a narcissistic idea, is like, oh, yes, here's a figure in a space and they're unbothered. Why is this radical? And even I was like questioning that. And wealth was just another added element to that, because then when people, it's funny, when you put dollar signs next to somebody, suddenly it's like, oh, well, of course. That's what they're all supposed to be. And it's like you realize that, no, that was before. It's just your idea of the wealth placed on them changed the read. And that was what the wealth series was. The show at Moad and Whitney and the one recently at Jack Shaman were all playing with that idea. But these pieces preceded that. So that's actually why I'm really glad we did the show, because I really wanted people to see actually the origin of that. How that story developed was around these works. I was thinking about it as I was drawing them. But to me, the binary has always just been problematic to me from the get. And if I were to show, if anything, black bodies not be bodies and be subjects, and even further than that, be stories, then I'm gonna fight towards that and not have it still be this sort of didactic thing.
Oh, hey, cutie.
How old were you when you first started drawing, and were you always good at it?
Hey, you painting it. You're so cool. You're like the coolest kid. There was a really interesting moment when I was being asked in an interview. Someone asked me like, oh, did you always know, since you were little, if you want to be an artist? I was like, no, I was running around butt naked being crazy. And my mom had to be like, put your clothes on, the neighbors can see. No, I was a crazy kid. I didn't really start loving art until The Lion King came out. Do you know who The Lion King is? The original Lion King. Not the new Lion King about to be revealed. And I was really interested in this character called Timon. And I was obsessed with drawing him, and we were moving to Alabama, and my mama, being the amazing woman that she is, bought me a coloring book of Timon, doing all these things, and I copied and copied and copied him on every surface. And that was how I basically got obsessed with drawing, and I was like 9. And then since then, it's just been no turning back. Thanks, Mom, for that.
I'm also 9.
Yeah, there you go. That's so awesome.
Hi, thank you for being here with us today. It's been a really, really wonderful talk, and it's always great to gain some insight into how such amazing work is made, so thank you. My question is, I was wondering how you would come up with the titles of your works, and when you come up with the title, if it's like something else to pick apart, is it just kind of like an afterthought? Not that the title is not significant, because obviously you know everything behind it. Like from the perspective of a writer, like it's really, really important to pack as much as you can into like the head and the deck of a title, and it's supposed to give some kind of signifier of what is to come. So obviously this medium is different, so I'm really, really curious about that.
Absolutely, that's a really good question. The best advice I ever got was never leave something untitled, because you're leaving the piece at the mercy of the viewer's read. So titles are a framework. You know, they're the frame. You know, I'm giving you just enough room as a viewer that you can enter that frame and do whatever you will with that. It could serve a lot of purposes. It can be a part of a story, so, or it can be its own isolated thing. It can be something I heard in a podcast and I thought that's a really great arrangement of words. I'm gonna put that as a title. You know, or a poem that I read and I really liked a phrase. So it really doesn't, the titles are a bit personal to me, but for me, the purpose of them is the framework. You know, they allow for you to just get enough in that they're not having these wild ideas. Because, I mean, show of hands, if someone were to, you know, you see an untitled piece, you're like, I have no idea what this is. And it could be the most specific picture you've ever seen, but again, where do you want the viewer to go, is what I'm thinking. You know, what kind of process of thinking or thought experiment do you want them to engage with? And if you're just leaving it open, it's not a rigorous activity. I think looking at images is a very rigorous activity. I want it to be, and I find it to be that way. And so, you know, it's my way of engaging with an audience to have that experience for them.
Hi, so you mentioned that you are a big fan of anime earlier.
Oh, snap.
I'm just wondering what your favorites were growing up, and if at all it's influenced your art.
Oh, wow. I'm about to really show my hand here.
I have to watch them every night. So I can talk about them right now.
That's the best gift ever.
Yeah, children, it's fantastic.
That was so shady sounding. I actually really loved like 80s, late 80s, mid to late 80s, 90s anime, especially Ghost in the Shell, 9 to 5. Good stuff. I don't know, Iria, Zero animation. I'm gonna be really nerdy right now. I don't even know if there's any anime fans in here. Venus Wars, Gal Force. I could go on. I'm not gonna show my spots anymore. But I was pretty hardcore, and I don't know if anyone remember back in the day, Sci-Fi Channel used to have Saturday anime. Does anyone remember that? I guess not. Well, I know you know that, John. But I'm saying, like, you know, it was like a thing every Saturday, and my younger brother and I used to watch it every Saturday, and that's how we learned English. Like, through these dubbed versions of anime movies. Explains so much. Oh, I think oh, sorry.
Hi, I have a question. Do you have a background in fashion, and what inspires it? Because like I want that outfit and that one.
I know, yeah.
So,
I think with any picture that you're making, and I think this is actually very much, unless I'm misquoting something that you said, it ties into literature as well, and this idea that you create the things that you wish to see. You know, you know, this garment doesn't exist, but I would love it to exist. You know, like the rules of, you know, making an image are, there's no rules. So for me, if I want to put a pink sweater and a white cap on, best believe it's gonna look dope. I'm gonna make it look dope because I want it to exist. Those kind of things are just kind of how I think about a picture, back to, again, the machinations of a picture. How do I make this green sweater work? How do I make those things work? Because I want them to exist. I want them to look like that's dope. I want to wear that, or whatever else is in the picture. But I have no background in fashion. I wore a head wrap for over 2 years because of this woman looking so dope in it. So I mean, my ideas of fashion are just like what everyone else sees, and you think, oh, I wish I could pull that off, but now I'm just like, I'm good looking like Grace Jones. I think that's gonna be my mode from now on.
This is not a real question, it's just a statement. When I first saw in 2015 the treatment, my fingers wept for your fingers. That is so much work that you put in, and I just had a vision of piles of ballpoint pens. And
It's accurate.
You should take them out for lunch, your fingers. That's a lot of work.
No, there's a lot of concern amongst family and friends about the state of my hands often. But no, I mean, I enjoy labor.
Right.
I really do. I think there's something I posted on my Instagram recently, and I believe in it 100%. I hate mediocrity so much. I just find it disgusting. Like, I want to see the labor. Like,
That's like saying you want to see the craft, right?
Yeah.
But until, I mean, when you were in art school, that was not a popular idea.
It was like the age of conceptual, like put a plank on a wall and call it
Right.
my existential crisis.
Yeah, I know.
Like, I'm just like, bitch, it's blue. I don't understand. Like, what are you doing?
I was at the Turner Prize the year a light switch going on and off.
Right.
There's Martin Creed, yeah.
Yeah.
But craft is human, right? It's beautiful for that reason.
Do you know there was this idea, I read it somewhere where it was like, you know, craft is also, it's cheap. It's almost like kitsch in a way.
Yes.
Like some people like say,
It's in
oh, well,
bad
it's not,
taste.
right, it's not, it's not conceptual enough. It's not, you know, intellectual enough. And, you know, craft is so easy because it's about skill, right? So it's something that can be acquired.
Right.
Anyone can learn it. Thus, it's not as elevated. Whereas if it's something like, something conceptual, like a flicking of a light up and down, then it's suddenly so genius. It's like, it's ephemeral in a way. I don't even know.
But wasn't it a timeline thing? Like, it interests me in the art schools and in literary theory. We're not too far apart in age. And we were being told at that point that all these things, craft, the subject, narrative, were over, it was done, it's all, you're like, but wait, we haven't even turned up yet.
Exactly.
The subject is over, but it's only 1 o'clock. That's how I felt. So I felt the emergence of black art recently, black craft, is kind of about restating, well, it might be over as far as you're concerned in this particular timeline of European art, but not over here.
But also, like, my favorite phrase from one of my teachers in school was like, you know, a person would paint or draw a picture of a window and call it the state of the world in war times or something pretentious like that. And then someone would have like a Rothko-esque looking painting and say, chair. And that's how I feel about conceptual art.
I like conceptual art, but the faith in language is, they gave up the primacy of the image for this faith in language, and the language wasn't even good. That's the part which is
But it's
which
also
is
this
depressing.
idea of like someone were to look at compound leaf and think, oh, this is only the sum of this very specific thing. It cannot be more. It doesn't have conceptual rigor in that. Right. And that was something that really was frustrating for me, is that people would just see this piece and just literally read it in that way and not give it the conceptual rigor that someone would give a freaking plank. You know,
Right. Then
which
the
I
onus
think
is
is
on the
crazy.
viewer.
You know, I'm giving you so much more information to dive into. I'm giving you frameworks. I'm giving you so much, and yet you're not willing to do the work,
But then I
which
think
is a very different thing than
Right,
what I'm
it's
bringing.
not a false argument between concept and figuration, because I think that can get like a depressing punch-up. But it is about the onus on the viewer to complicate what they see. And the danger, I think, with pictures like this is people see only the subject because that's the only thing they see. Like when they walk down the street and they see a tall black guy, they see a tall black, they see that. But there's more going on in these pictures at every level. There's craft, there's stroke, there's image, there's concept. So it's partly being willing to, the worst thing for me when figurative went out of fashion is people would stand in front of it and say, there's no thinking here. There's nothing going on here. Well, that depends very much on how much you bring to the table too. It's a two-way street, that relationship.
And also, let's move away from exoticism. That's
Right.
why I make them the most mundane, banal scenes you can imagine, to make it every day so then you can pay attention to all of that work.
Right.
And it's not just about, oh, let's exoticize this thing because we're not used to seeing it. No, they're sitting on a chair.
Right.
I think you've seen a person sitting on a chair. So at this point now, we can move past the person on the chair and actually like look at the picture and really get what's going on. At least that's what I'm thinking about. And in terms of the treatment, I just wanted to, kind of go into this idea of white male entitlement and remove it. Because now you're like all of us, you're colored. So what else do you have to offer?
Right.
That was what that series was about. And I did about like 50 of them, so yeah, my hand was, because there was times where I was like, Leonardo DiCaprio's not this interesting. Why am I going through the struggle? It's just mush, face. There's no definition. I hope no one like who represents him ever sees this video.
Are there any more questions? Or I think we might be out of time, I'm not sure. Any more? We done? Oh, one more.
Got one more.
Hi, thank you for the talk. I was just wondering, when I was seeing your show, especially at Jack Shainman, I noticed in terms of space and in terms of where the people are, I can't quite pin down what time period they're existing in. Also in terms of space, and this is something you spoke about, Zadie, in your essay, that the pictorial space is kind of off, I guess. So I suppose, is that intentional in terms of where they're existing, who they are, where they're going, and what does that mean to you, I suppose?
Absolutely. I mean, you kind of said it. There was a piece in, I keep mentioning Whitney, I don't know why, but I was looking at this piece recently. It's the first one you see when you come in, and it's called Overseeing the Family Seat. And that piece literally has Tuscan hills, Nigerian like jungles. I believe the clouds were from Sausalito, California. And at some point there is like a section of the mountain that is from Pride and Prejudice, the one with Keira Knightley in it, where she's on the cliff, like that's in there too. Literally, like I don't feel like I have to be sort of beholden to place and time, because so much of what I experience the world as, and this is also just how my growing up has been, is there is no sense of place. That's not reliable to me. And one of the reasons why I was so attracted to portraits was that I could see a Renaissance portrait or a Tudor portrait and think, this is the weirdest thing ever, because it's like a place I can't picture, I can't imagine it. Even if I'm in England, even if I'm in wherever, I can't picture it. And I always thought, like, what a great, not escape, but what a great opportunity for a picture to like create a world that looks very, very real, but is in fact comprised of nonsensical elements put together. And that to me is a far more engaging story than something that's very grounded in a specific thing. Like, I think portraiture is very deceptive in that way. You think you're looking at a person, very specific person in a very specific place and time, but that is just the starting point. To me, a portrait is a catalyst to something. And to me, my purpose right now is storytelling. And the only way to do that is to put things in there that make no sense at all, angles that are completely off, because that's how I see my world that I'm creating, and it's far more interesting to me.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you all for coming, and thank you, Zadie and Toyin. That was wonderful.